The cafe had barely opened when David pushed through the door, Ranger close enough that the dog's side brushed his leg. The bell above the frame gave a weary jingle, and the smell of coffee and fresh bread drifted out like a gentle wave. David gave Sarah a small nod from behind the counter, the kind of greeting regulars trade without words. He almost didn't notice the girl sitting on the steps outside. She was turned slightly away from the street, a damp rag folded in her hands like a flag lowered in surrender. About 11 years old, ponytail thin, knees scuffed. A neat stack of menus she'd already wiped rested at her side. Through the window, her reflection looked faint and ghost-like against the daylight. Ranger spotted her first. The shepherd backed out the door, nose working the air, tail moving in a cautious sweep. The girl didn't shrink when he came closer. She only blinked, and Ranger rested his chin lightly on her wrist, the same way he comforted men waking from bad dreams. "Lily," Sarah called gently from behind the counter, "leave those for me. I'll handle the rest." Her tone carried practiced care, the kind that knows not to startle something fragile. David paused on the threshold. "You help out here." Lily gave a small nod, her eyes following two students in crisp blue and white uniforms rushing past. Her jaw tightened before she spoke. "Sometimes." When I'm allowed, Ranger settled beside her, paws even, ears soft. David noticed the rag wasn't just damp. Her fingers were reddened from hot water. "Shouldn't you be in school?" he asked carefully. Her gaze stayed on the sidewalk. "I don't go." The words were flat, rehearsed. "Dad says it doesn't matter." A bus rumbled at the corner and moved along. Inside, an order bell chimed. Ranger looked up at David, a silent question in his eyes. David eased himself onto the step. "Want to tell me why?" Lily swallowed. "It's complicated." Ranger stayed perfectly still, as though holding the silence open for her. Sarah appeared with 2 steaming cups, coffee for David, hot chocolate topped with a floating cloud of whipped cream for Lily, a buttered roll on a small plate. "On the house," she said. "You've done enough this morning." Lily lingered at the edge of a booth until Ranger nudged her knee. She sat, wrapping both hands around the cocoa like she needed its warmth to keep steady. David held his mug too, letting the quiet do its work so she wouldn't feel cornered. The diner moved around them as always, the hiss from the grill, forks tapping plates, a radio playing soft old tunes. The glass reflected 3 figures together, a weary soldier, a loyal dog, and a child who seemed to lean on borrowed sunlight just to keep going. "She drops by most days," Sarah said quietly, wiping at a spotless patch of counter. "Stacks menus, clears tables, carries cups. Sometimes I slip her pie, or a sandwich. She never asks, she just helps." Lily's shoulders flinched at being noticed. "I like helping," she whispered. "Keeps me busy." "Busy from what?" David asked. Her eyes stayed on the cocoa, where the cream was melting. "From thinking." Ranger settled against her feet, chin on her shoelaces, breathing slow and steady. His tail tapped once, rhythmic and calm. "Do you want to be in school, Lily?" David asked, his tone even, the question too simple to avoid. "Yes," she said without hesitation, "more than anything." "What's keeping you out?" Her lips tightened, color rising across her cheeks. "It's not money." "Not exactly." She searched for the right word, then gave up. "It's complicated." Sarah and David exchanged a glance over their cups, 2 adults quietly weighing the size of a problem from the way a child refused to name it. Ranger blinked up at Lily, unwavering, as though he could wait as long as she needed. The cocoa grew cold in her hands. Outside, the bell at the crosswalk chimed, and a stream of children in matching uniforms drifted by like a moving tide. Lily wasn't permitted to join them. The evening air carried the mix of salt and exhaust when David offered to walk her home. She hesitated, biting her lip, until Ranger trotted a step ahead, as if already knowing the way. That small sign made her nod. They turned onto a narrow street where the houses stood shoulder to shoulder. Lily's home looked ordinary enough. Fresh paint, neatly trimmed hedges, a porch light shining a warm welcome. From the sidewalk, it could have been any family's house. The door swung open before Lily could touch the handle. A woman in her mid-30s appeared, apron dusted with flour. Her smile was faint, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Oh, you must be the man from the diner," she said, her gaze sliding past David to rest on Lily. "She bothers you, doesn't she?" "She doesn't bother me," David answered evenly. Ranger stepped between Lily and the doorway, tail rigid, ears pitched forward. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. She avoids school, too lazy for it, always looking for excuses. It's easier keeping her here, helping. The word helping cut through the air like a blade, as though Lily were a tool to be used up instead of a child to be loved. Lily shrank back, and Ranger rumbled a low, steady growl that vibrated through the porch floorboards. "Thank you for walking her," the woman said briskly, pushing the door open wider. "We're fine now." David's eyes flicked to the spotless curtains, the neatly arranged shoes, the picture frames lined up too precisely. Everything was arranged to look perfect. Yet beside him, Lily trembled and the dog's instinct stood on edge like a warning. He tipped his cap. "Evening, ma'am." As the door clicked shut, Ranger's amber eyes fixed on the narrow gap until it closed completely. On the walk back, David stayed silent. He didn't need words. The unease in his chest told him what Ranger already knew. Something was wrong behind that glowing porch light. The next morning, the diner smelled of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee, but David's eyes went straight to the back. Lily balanced on a stool too tall for her, stretching across the counter with a stack of clean glasses. Her thin arms trembled under the weight, yet she never complained. Sarah hurried out from the kitchen, flour streaked across her cheek. I tell her she doesn't have to, but she insists. Says it makes her feel useful. She gave David a look heavy with both warmth and concern. Ranger patted over, tail giving a single wag before he settled at Lily's side. She set the glasses down carefully, then crouched to press her forehead gently against his. For that brief moment, she looked less like a worker and more like a child allowed to rest. David slid into his usual booth. "Morning, Lily." "No school today?" Her hands froze, clutching the dish towel tighter. "I don't go," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the diner's hum. He leaned forward, tone low but firm. "You told me it was complicated. What does that mean?" Her shoulders trembled. She sank onto the stool, Ranger pressing against her knees like a shield. Finally, the words tumbled out in a rush. "I have to stay home. I watch my little brother. Her voice cracked. "She says I don't need school. She says girls like me don't deserve it." Tears dotted the towel in her lap. Ranger nudged her chin with his nose and gave a soft whine that filled the silence Sarah dared not break. David gripped his coffee cup. He had heard confessions in desert tents, in barracks, and in hospital wards, but nothing cut deeper than a child quietly confessing that her future was being stolen. The following afternoon, David found himself walking down Lily Street again. This time, David didn't head for the diner's door. He stopped instead by the low fence next door, where an elderly woman sat in a faded chair, knitting with hands thin and brittle as twigs. Her name was Mrs. Howard, though around the neighborhood most called her Miss Annie. Ranger trotted ahead, nosed through a patch of marigolds, then curled at her feet as if he'd belonged there all his life. Annie chuckled, scratching behind his ears. That one knows people. Good judge of character, David introduced himself with care, then gradually steered the talk toward Lily. Annie's needles slowed. That poor child, she sighed. Her mother died when she was hardly out of diapers. Sweetest woman, gone just like that. And her daddy remarried before the year was out. Too soon, if you ask me. The needles clicked softly in her lap. Since then, it's that little girl running the house more than living in it. David listened as the story spilled out. Early mornings spent cooking oatmeal for her baby brother, afternoons bent over laundry, evenings rocking him to sleep while her stepmother watched television. Annie's voice dropped lower. And all the while, she's begged for school. I've heard her. Please, just let me try. But that woman brushes her off, calls it a waste. David's jaw tightened. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching at the edge in Annie's voice. She deserves better, the old woman whispered, eyes dim with sorrow. You can see it, can't you? She's not lazy. She's invisible in her own home. David rose slowly, drawing in a breath. He had seen silence hollow out soldiers, watched neglect erase men who came back from war. Now he saw the same shadow falling over a child. Ranger pressed against his leg, steady and insistent, as if urging him, do something. By dusk, David was on Lily's porch. The bulb above the door hummed, throwing a pale, sterile glow. Ranger stood firm at his side, hackles smooth but body taut, already sensing the tension. 2 knocks. The door opened. Lily's father filled the frame, broad shoulders of a laborer, eyes dulled with weariness. Behind him hovered the stepmother, mouth set in a hard line. I need a word, David said, voice carrying the weight of command, softened only by respect. They let him in. The living room was tidy to the point of display, cushions squared, a vase of plastic flowers centered on the table. A set meant to look like order. Lily perched at the sofa's edge, hands clamped together. Her father cleared his throat. I know why you're here. Lily's fine. We keep her home. It's easier this way. She helps the stepmother cut in, sharp. She's lazy. School's wasted on her. Better she learn to be useful. Ranger surged to his feet, stepping in front of Lily, chest broad, a low growl thrumming from deep inside. David's gaze stayed fixed on the father. You wore the same uniform I once did. You know what opportunity means. You know the cost when a child is denied it. His voice thickened. Don't stand by while your daughter's future is stripped away. The man shifted, shame flickering in his eyes, but the stepmother's glare pinned him in place. It's complicated, he muttered. No, David said, cutting the word cleanly across the room. It's cowardice. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Ranger's growl, steady, relentless, refusing to let Lily go unprotected a second longer. Later that night, David asked the father to speak alone. They stood in the kitchen, dimly lit by a single bulb swaying above the sink. Ranger stretched across the doorway, a living barrier keeping the stepmother out. The father leaned against the counter, hands thick with calluses, eyes fixed on a crack in the worn linoleum. You don't understand, he muttered. I work all week, sometimes 2 jobs. I can't fight with her too. If I push, the whole house falls apart. David kept his tone steady. So instead, you put the weight on your daughter. The man winced. I know she wants school. God, I know. I've heard her crying for it. But I'm drowning. I owe money. The rent's late. My wife says Lily's better off helping here. At least she's safe. Safe? David's voice sharpened. Safe isn't being told you're worthless. Safe isn't being hidden away while your childhood slips through your fingers. A faint shuffle came from the hallway. Lily stood barefoot on the tiles, her hair loose around her shoulders. She hadn't meant to listen, but her expression showed she'd heard every word. I don't want safe, she whispered. Her voice shook, yet her gaze locked onto her father. I just want to learn. I just want to read. Ranger pressed against her side, his fur brushing her hand like a promise. Her father opened his mouth, then shut it again. In that instant, guilt seemed to carve lines deeper into his face. The honesty in his daughter's plea left him stripped bare. David stepped forward, steady as a commander. You don't need to fight a war here. You just need to stand up for her once the silence that followed was heavy, not empty, the sound of a man realizing that silence itself was betrayal. The next morning, David sat at the corner booth, hunched over a chipped mug of coffee with a notepad spread across the table. Ranger dozed at his feet, ears twitching each time the diner door creaked open. Sarah set down a plate of eggs. Planning another mission? She asked softly. In a way, David muttered, pen scratching across the paper. By noon, he'd made calls to an old contact at the Veterans Association and to a local community legal aid office. Both responded with the urgency of soldiers hearing a call worth answering. The law was clear. Lily had the right to go to school. Volunteers pledged supplies. A retired teacher even offered to tutor her after hours. That evening, David returned to Lily's home, a folder in his hand. Ranger trotted ahead, tail held high as though he already sensed change. Inside, Lily's father slumped at the table, hollow-eyed. The stepmother stood with arms crossed, her mouth tight with disdain. David placed the papers between them like evidence laid out in a courtroom. Here's the law, he said evenly. And here's a scholarship from people ready to stand behind Lily. She will be going to school. The stepmother snapped, We don't need charity. David didn't flinch. This isn't charity. It's her right. Deny it, and you'll answer to more than me. The father's hand hovered over the papers. The room was silent except for Ranger's steady breathing. Then slowly, the pen scratched across the page. His signature. Lily gasped, both, hands flying to her mouth. Ranger bounded to her side, tail whipping in joyful arcs. For the first time, her future had a doorway, and someone had finally turned the key. On her first morning of school, Lily stood on the diner steps in a hand-me-down uniform that was too large. The skirt brushed her shins, the blouse sleeves rolled neatly at the cuffs, but her smile made the ill fit invisible. She clutched a second-hand backpack as though it were treasure. Sarah, misty-eyed, snapped a photo with her old phone. "Look at you," she whispered, bright as a penny. David adjusted the straps on Lily's backpack with the precision of the soldier he once was. "Straps tight," he said, "keeps the weight steady." "You'll walk straighter," that way Ranger circled them, tail sweeping wide arcs before falling into step beside Lily as she set off toward the school. Passers-by glanced curiously at the dog trotting proudly at her side, but no one dared stop them. At the gate, Lily hesitated. Beyond it, the playground rang with laughter, shouts, and the thud of a ball bouncing across concrete. Children in crisp uniforms clustered together, already forming bonds. Her smile wavered. "I'm late," she murmured. "They already know more than me." David crouched so his eyes met hers. "You're not late. You're just starting with a heavier pack. That doesn't mean you won't finish first." Ranger leaned against her leg, steady and warm, amber eyes urging her forward. With a trembling breath, Lily stepped through the gate. The bell clanged, and the current of students swallowed her in. After class let out, she slipped back to the corner, her bag tipped open, notebook spilling, pages marked with fresh handwriting. Balancing dishes for Sarah in one hand, she kept her pencil in the other, unwilling to pause her work. Amid the rhythm of clattering cups and sizzling pans, the girl who once only looked in from the outside was now, without question, part of the world of learning. 3 weeks later, the bell above the door jingled, and Lily rushed in, her cheeks pink from the cold. In her hand, she held a paper aloft like a banner of triumph. "Mr. David," she called, hurrying toward his usual booth. "Look, I got a perfect score." David set his coffee down, and for the first time in a long while, a smile crept across his face. He opened the paper with care, as though it were a medal instead of a test. The bright red circle at the top glowed with more meaning than any honor he had ever been given. From behind the counter, Sarah clapped her flower-covered hands together. "Wonderful work, sweetheart." A few regulars lifted their mugs in celebration, and soon the little diner rang with laughter, cheers, and warmth. Ranger bounded over, paws tapping on the tiles, tail beating furiously. Lily dropped to her knees, throwing her arms around his neck. The shepherd pressed close, panting happily, eyes shining as if he too shared in her victory. David watched them, the child and the dog framed in the golden light of late afternoon streaming through the window. For years he had walked through life as though the war had never ended, as if nothing remained worth holding on to. But here, in a child's laughter and a dog's devotion, something inside him eased. He leaned back, letting the sound of the diner surround him. Maybe he hadn't been the only one doing the saving. Perhaps Lily and Ranger had saved him too. And so the story did not close in sorrow, but with a truth that could not be shaken. Education is more than lessons. It is dignity. It is hope. It is the power to dream. And sometimes it takes the fragile bravery of a child and the unwavering loyalty of a dog to remind us what truly matters.